Conversations with the Universe, an Amanita Muscaria trip report by Amanita Mountain, posted to earwid.org, January 3rd, 2023. Consuming 15 grams of Amanita Muscaria ranks among the most intense experiences of my life. While being a challenging and intense experience, it was very rewarding, helped me answer some difficult questions I had. I went into the experience without expectations or goals, other than to experience what the mushrooms had to offer. With that being said, I was blown away by how therapeutic the whole experience turned out for me, considering my lack of preparation. This experience helped me better understand death and the purpose of life. It also gave me some intense and unpleasant effects that made it clear that consuming larger amounts of Amanita is not something to take lightly. I bought 15 grams of Amanita Muscaria mushrooms online from a seller based out of Minnesota. The mushrooms themselves were picked in Alaska. There is a common misconception that these mushrooms are poisonous, even though humans have been consuming them for thousands of years. I read that the mushrooms needed to be processed to convert the ibotenic acid to muscimol in order to avoid some potential negative effects. I've heard of this conversion process being done through a variety of different means, like placing the mushrooms in milk or by drinking the urine of someone willing to eat them raw. I opted for the more modern method of boiling them in water with a lemon juice-based solution with a pH of 2.7. The length of time that they are boiled in the solution determines the amount of ibotenic acid that is converted over to muscimol. I read that converting the ibotenic acid to muscimol would eliminate some of the more profound elements of the experience, so I opted to convert 30% of the ibotenic acid to muscimol. A 30% conversion is the bare minimum from what I read to prevent nausea while allowing for more effects. While potency can range wildly, I read that 15 grams of mushrooms would constitute a heroic dose. I only bought 15 grams, so I figured that going with the heroic dose would give me the biggest bang for my buck. After about 45 minutes of boiling the mushrooms, I strained them with cheesecloth and poured all of the liquid from the pot into a cup, discarding the mushrooms themselves. The mixture had a horrendous smell, but wasn't too bad on the taste buds due to the lemon juice in it. I did gag once or twice, but put the mixture down without much of an issue. Almost immediately I started feeling stomach nausea. I sat down on the couch and played video games, expecting the effects to take up to an hour or so to kick in. 30 minutes in, I needed to take a Zofran to control some of the stomach nausea I was experiencing. By the time I hit the hour mark, I was starting to feel drunk. It was harder to focus on my game, and my balance was off. The stomach nausea also went away, and I started making some ridiculous comments to others in the room, and became very, very intoxicated. A pulse was beating in my head like a metronome that would continue throughout the experience, getting faster and faster as time went on. This pulse gave me an intense urge to dance and act crazy, though it didn't necessarily feel good to move around. I began frequently urinating in intervals of 5 minutes, which would continue throughout the entire experience. By this time, I was belligerent and was saying some crazy stuff to others in the room. By the time I hit the 2-hour mark, the rhythm had greatly increased, and I felt the drunkenness turning into something far more intense and psychedelic. I knew that something crazy was coming, and moved into bed to prepare for it. I put in earphones and turned on some music while hallucinations began. I didn't see shapes or anything like that appearing before my eyes. It was just very dissociative, and I felt like I was now somehow partially separated from my body. I started to see what I understood to be my entire life passing before my eyes. At the end of each cycle, I would die and feel my consciousness move on. This cycle repeated itself over and over and over again at faster and faster intervals. I tried to narrate what I was experiencing to my wife, but couldn't quite put the words to the experience. I reached the point where I was no longer aware of my body, and totally felt separate from it. Immersed in total blackness, I realised I had died and faded away into nothingness. I started having a conversation with someone I initially thought to be the creator of the universe. The creator explained that when we die, our consciousness disassociates from our bodies and slowly fades into peace and non-existence. I felt my consciousness fade away, and a beautiful peace came over me. The creator explained to me that many people would self-terminate immediately if they knew how much peace they could find in death. This did not mean that life wasn't worth living, the creator explained. It was up to me to make life an experience worth living. The creator explained that my own personal happiness was the most important thing. Family, religion, and other obligations were not supposed to take any precedence over my own happiness, and should be tools used to increase my own happiness. The realization that I would fade into non-existence when I die made the pointlessness of my former faith in the Mormon Church becoming abundantly clear. I'd made large sacrifices throughout my life in hopes of going to non-existent heaven with my family. The Creator explained that my sacrifices were not making me any happier, and that my decision to leave the church with my family was necessary to be the best and most authentic version of myself. Other things were taught to me, but I can't remember any of them, due to the chaos that soon started to creep into my thoughts. My perception of time completely went out the window, and I began to feel like I was trapped in endless time loops. I made the mistake of trying to fight against these time loops and desperately tried to escape them. It wasn't until I realised that I needed to submit to them that I was finally able to escape into sleep after what felt like hours of effort. The sleep felt incredibly deep, and I can't even remember dreaming at all. My alarm woke me up at 4:30 AM, and I felt refreshed and ready to take on the world. As I took the 2.5-hour drive to work, I was feeling both anxious and amazed about what I had experienced the night before. For the first couple of days after, I felt a little traumatized by the experience, and it wasn't until I could process it all with my wife that I was able to accept the experience for what it was. The trip on the fly agaric mushroom wasn't a bad trip, because I really don't think there is such a thing. The negative aspects of the experience were largely due to me being wholly unprepared for a heroic dose. I probably should have started with half of the amount that I took, or mentally prepared myself for a serious psychedelic journey. I can understand why this mushroom was used by people in shamanic experiences for thousands of years. It really does have the power to unlock parts of your mind. However, I don't think it is magical or supernatural in any way. All of the things it taught me were things I already had floating around in my mind. It just organised these thoughts and presented them to me in a way that was extremely impactful. This creator that I had a conversation with presented itself as the universe in its entirety. I don't think it matters if a creator exists, but it was beautiful to think of the creator as the universe itself, which is something we are a part of and will return to when we die. A heroic dose of Amanita muscaria should be approached with reverence and caution. It was a life-changing experience, but not one that I feel the need to repeat anytime soon. A marvellous, joyful, encouraging journey. An Amanita muscaria and Hawaiian baby woodrose trip report. Posted by Lucky57 to earwid.org September 1st, 2018. If it matters, I am 6'6", height weight proportionate. I took these substances at home by myself at 4:20 PM Mountain Daylight Savings Time on August 11th, 2018. This instance was the first time I'd ever taken any sort of mushroom. I'd read that keeping the dosage low is a good idea on the first try. I'd taken Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds before in combination with morning glory seeds, with somewhat unsatisfactory results: nausea, lack of intensity, etc. My mindset was extremely relaxed in the matter. I felt quite confident about what I was doing and that nothing would happen that I couldn't handle psychologically. I'd read that having a sitter, at least on the first try, was a good idea. But I consider myself a very stable person, one who's endured a couple of so-called bad trips along with some very traumatic experiences in life. But having survived them all and being in my 60s, I didn't feel prone to any sort of psychological breakdown. I didn't wish to take on an empty stomach. I felt that might lead to nausea. I tried various preparation methods with morning glory seeds, all of which were taken on an empty stomach with the experience of nearly intolerable nausea. About 90 minutes prior to ingestion of the caps and seeds, I ate a turkey and cheese sandwich with a little mustard and a little caffeine-free Diet Coca-Cola. I tore off small pieces of the mushroom and chewed them all carefully. It didn't really taste that bad either, sort of earthy, musky. I took all 4 seeds at once and chewed them, leaving them under my tongue for a minute, then swallowing them. Then, I took 2 dimenhydrinate, not diphenhydramine I must say, or Benadryl. They're these anti-nausea tablets, and alongside that I ate a clementine orange since I'd heard that acidic fluids help to potentiate the alkaloids in the mushrooms and seeds. After about an hour and 45 minutes, I took a booster dose of half a cap of Amanita muscaria, as well as 2 Hawaiian babywood rose seeds. Then, after about 2 hours and 30 minutes, or 2 hours and 45, I began to experience some mild closed-eye visions. It was like sitting on a big outdoor balcony with a 180-degree view of the aurora borealis. Gradually, the visions became more intense, much more colourful, and much more complex, with constantly changing abstract patterns. It was like watching multiple movie screens at once, being able to pay attention to all of them at once and note what was happening in each one of them. Sometimes all of the screens would meld to form one single image, and occasionally, figures of faces, which I initially thought of as being grotesque, menacing or perverse, were a little bit intimidating at first, but I knew that resisting these figures or trying to run from them would intensify the slight anxiety I first felt. So, I willingly accepted them, and I thought of them as being my friends rather than enemies, which caused me to smile. I thought of my smile as moving through space under a strobe light, like a river of undulating smiles which made me smile all the harder. I began to feel joy at knowing that I was under the influence and so much in control of it. I conceived of reaching out to touch the visions, and extended my arm upwards above my body while lying on my back, which was about 4 hours and 30 minutes after the initial dose. It was as if I dived right into the middle of all these marvellously coloured patterns and pieces of jewel-like light sources. They were inside of me now, making me feel happy, secure and warm. They filled me up, and I exploded into 1,000 whirling multicoloured galaxies, all sending off sparks of light. Yet even though it exploded, I could stand and watch myself as a separate observer, even though I'd experienced that sensation of filling up and so joyfully exploding. The galaxies reconvened to reconstitute myself, and suddenly I conceived of a spectacular light source that began rapidly entering my body and exiting, back and forth, going faster and faster, and at times, it seemed to be facilitating inside and outside of my body, and at other times, I was facilitating inside and outside of it. And then, both were happening at the very same time. When written in black and white on paper, it doesn't quite make much sense. The sense of space and time were more fluid, kept going faster and faster, and as the frequency rose, I was able to hear a sound that rose in pitch to match this frequency. At last, the light and I were completely one, and then we began twirling and rotating through an ocean of colours. Our form changed constantly and would encompass the normal size of my body to perhaps 100 square miles back and forth. Throughout all of this, I'm aware of the constant process of change, renewal, and acceptance of the rapidity with which it was all happening. So much was happening in such a short time that time itself seemed to slow down. It was at this point I thought to myself, I think I'm pretty much peaking about now, which caused another huge smile and a sense of joy and satisfaction to watch over me. The fact that I was actually able to enjoy a hallucinogenic experience, especially after my rather strict upbringing, made me feel very pleased. It had been about 5 hours now since I took the first dose of mushrooms and seeds. I conceived that something sacred and otherworldly had entered me and that I had entered it. Some magisterial, majestic force that was making me lose my own identity, myself, repeatedly, over and over again. For some reason it seemed natural to me to find myself over and over again, and to continually identify with it. As time passed, I became weary of it, and it dawned on me that perhaps I was being called upon by this force to relinquish possession of myself, to let go, and perhaps even to die. While the same visions of colours and vibration and frequencies were right in front of me and inside of me, it was as if I had a separate dream about riding a horse out in the country. I came to a wide and beautiful crystal clear stream and my horse drank from it. A very handsome elderly man, similar to Gandalf, with white hair and a big thick long white beard, rode up on his own beautiful white horse on the other side of the stream. His black eyes sparkled, and he smiled broadly at me with his deeply creased face, instantly winning my trust. He slowly crossed over to my side of the stream, holding my eyes with his steady gaze and smile. "Ride with me," he said. "You'll see. It'll be beautiful." With only slight hesitation, I began to ride with him, and it was now as if I had a trail partner, someone I could trust in and rely upon. The wonderful visions continued. Only now I had someone to share them with, and that made me very happy. It dawned upon me that I had given myself up to death itself, and it was truly wonderful. Never had I been happier or felt more satisfied or complete than in that moment. It was so reassuring to think that this is what death is like. Thinking of death as a friend, a companion, a trail partner. This was such a refreshing thought for me. 7 hours after the initial dose, the visions began to weaken, and my thoughts became less compelling. Around the 8-hour mark, the last few flickers of colour in my vision had slipped away. I lay awake for an additional 4 hours after this, unable to sleep, and around the 12-hour mark I finally drifted off, around 4:30 AM the next day. I had some fairly routine, unremarkable dreams. I plan to take the drugs earlier in the day next time, so I won't be up all night again. I slept until 1 in the afternoon and felt very mildly hungover, although nothing nearly as bad as a bad alcohol hangover. Also of note is that the mushrooms and seeds had a fairly rapid laxative effect. After 3 hours I had a large bowel movement, rapidly followed by another liquid bowel movement. It was an extremely satisfying experience though, I must say, giving me several whole-body shivers, almost like having an orgasm. It almost made me laugh to think that it was similar to what a woman must feel when giving birth. While squatting on the bog, I got totally ensconced in watching some light patterns on the bathroom wall for a few minutes. It made me laugh when I realised what I was doing, sitting there with a wad of toilet paper in my hand and a dirty bum. All in all though, I must say that this was a fantastic, rewarding and growing experience. Up until 4 years ago I hadn't done any hallucinogens since the mid-1970s as a late teen, early 20s lad. At that time, there was still a terrible stigma attached to it all, at least in my mind. I took LSD once under really poor circumstances and had quite the bad time. Mescaline was way more fun. It was about 4 years ago that I took morning glory seeds in Hawaiian baby woodrows, and I did this several times with somewhat unsatisfactory results. And after trying to figure out how to obtain illegal substances, recently heard about Amanita muscaria mushrooms and Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds. I got the mushrooms online. I think there may be some risk to ordering the mushrooms. Seems to be questionable legality to owning the dried versions of it. But thankfully, nothing happened with it this time at all, and hopefully never will. The following is an Amanita Muscaria trip report, sent in by a subscriber. Hi, I'm Thomas from France, and I really appreciate your channel. It's helped me a lot, and since I don't have any friends around me experimenting with plant or mush medicine, I have no one to talk to or hear from regarding this, so thank you. Here is my report from Tuesday the 24th of October, 2023. Last Tuesday, I came back to my house in a small village after a long weekend in the city. I knew I forgot a jar outside before leaving. In it were a few Amanita caps, fresh in cold water. It was a leftover from a harvest that took ages to dry in multiple oven sessions. I didn't want to throw them away, so I decided to try a sun tea, because apparently UV would convert ibotenic acid into mucimol. I've been experimenting with Amanitas since last year's harvest. They're abundant in the forest nearby. My goal was to trip, but I started experimenting with this really special mushroom in the safest way possible. And after 10 months, I'd finished 3 big jars of dried caps without ever feeling anything, not even a buzz. But nevertheless, I had good nights and vivid dreams. So back to last Tuesday, the jar was still there. It's been cold, so I decided to consume it. I wasn't trusting that the UV would have done a good job, so I decided to boil the thing and reduce the volume. I let it simmer for about 40 minutes. Once the brew was in my cup, I added lemon juice and honey. About halfway down, I started shivering every time I was swallowing. I told myself, this is a good sign. It's going to work this time. I drank a bit more and I started to wonder if it would be a better idea to stop there, but I finished it anyway. Quickly I felt an effect like being drunk. My stomach was empty for 6 hours, and at 8 PM, 45 minutes after I ingested the tea, I went upstairs to meditate in my bed, seated against the wall, and blacked out. Did I fall asleep? The next thing I remember is slowly coming back to consciousness, but not quite in my ego in this world. I could think, this is it, this is working this time. But I had no idea why I would think that. Brain palpitations, as I call it, were hitting hard. It was like blinking really quickly, but not quite the same. Then, a dissociating sensation submersed me. It reminded me of salvia divinorum, mixed with that feeling that you get during a K-hole, this kind presence, and the feeling that you're home. I started having a vision of a parabolic object covered with thousands of mirrors which were flipping upside down, one after the other, at every palpitation. This was super weird, and I still had no idea of what was really happening. Then, I had the strange feeling that I was getting close to the truth of all things, once every palpitations would merge into one. During that phase of increasing speed, my consciousness came back, and I remembered that I took Amanita, but wasn't quite sure where I was right now. I felt the mattress, and it reassured me, and I put trust in the process of what was unfolding. It's like something close to an orgasm, and I felt I would explode or something, or merge into another dimension entirely. I was grabbing my sheets and tightening my jaw. I wanted to make it, whatever it was. But suddenly, an urge to vomit came over me. I opened my eyes and saw the window lit up by the moon. I stood up, almost fell, and then purged twice outside. The garden itself seemed 30 meters down. The imbalance I was feeling was crazy. I could feel my body falling to the back left. I was off that brainstorm, and once I figured how to balance out, I wanted to go downstairs to the bathroom. The staircase is pretty steep, so I was really careful. But once I was at the bottom, I realised I couldn't feel my body moving, even during really fast movements. No muscle pain whatsoever. The time distortion was really something to behold. I could go full Flash Gordon mode, and it actually made me laugh. But I thought about what I just went through, and I decided to go back to my bed to meditate, curious on what I would feel next. I realised upon grabbing my phone that it was now 3 AM, and this was a shocking revelation. Did all the other tries of Amanita peak when I was asleep? And this one woke me up because I needed to puke, I wondered. I couldn't believe how messed up I was 7.5 hours in. I tried to unlock my phone without success, and during that, I started completely dissociating from my body. My awareness itself seemed to emanate from above my left shoulder. I couldn't feel my body whatsoever, but I could intervene at any time I wanted. It was quite pleasant being 50% out of my body and 50% in. I sat cross-legged with my back against the wall and started breathing deeply. Nothing noticeable in terms of vision. I was still half dissociated.
But then, my arms started moving by themselves or by some kind of force that I could feel in my hands. I decided to trust it, and then time slowed down a lot. I was amazed by this. My arms were moving up and down in slow motion, completely out of my control. Suddenly, it's like inviting me up to some kind of a dance. I let myself go without intervening, thinking it could heal my neck and shoulder pain. I mean, why not? I was shaking and moving really fast as the flow of time suddenly came back to normal. I started chanting and hyperventilating. Again, I could have stopped it at any time, but I was really curious to experience it. I had no idea what I was saying. It was like a shaman trance and ended with banging my head against the mattress, still hyperventilating. Then, it all stopped on empty lungs. I held my breath and told myself, why is it making me do a Wim Hof? Or is it me? Or it? As I was just dissociated before, it could have been a spirit. Anyway, after a few breath holds, I felt really tired and could feel my body falling asleep, but my awareness itself was slowly drifting to the top right of my sight. I thought I was about to be conscious in the unconscious. The drift out was really slow, and it felt like a tutorial or something, but any time I swallowed my saliva, it was taking me right back into my body. I had multiple tries, and I could hear voices teaching me the whole time. Unfortunately, I fell asleep at some point. The dreams I had after this were crazy real and coloured, and utterly insane in what was happening in them. I'm not ready to put that into words right now. I woke up pretty alright, although a bit worried about those 6 to 7 hours of blackout, and I didn't tell you that I pissed my bed during this whole time. All in all, this was a very intense experience, and I do wish someone was around for it, but at the same time I sort of don't, because I would have alarmed anyone during the trance, dance and chanting stage. It's really important to brew tea from as many dried caps as you can, as the concentration of the compounds varies quite a lot. It really was a mistake for me to brew 7 fresh caps. I do not recommend this whatsoever. Be safe, out and in there. Totalito. Dancing with God. An Amanita Muscaria trip report by B. Torsen, posted to earwid.org December 20th, 2004. I took an estimated 7 to 9 grams of these mushrooms. Took half a large cap with tea at 8 PM. Tea was made by boiling water for 3 minutes in the microwave, and then pouring the still very hot water over the cap, letting it steep for 10 minutes or so. I then filtered it through a tea strainer. Took the tea with milk. Wish I had some honey though, because even though I love soma, I dislike the taste, especially in a tea. About 9:30 PM, I ate another half of a dried cap. This was a medium-sized one. I was feeling pretty good by 10, high by 11 PM. I then chewed the last bit, around 1/5 of a medium cap around 11:30. The last bit seemed to about push me over the edge. Again, total consumption estimated at 7 to 9 grams, from 3 separate dried mushrooms, all being caps. Some observations from my notes taken at the time. The world is pulsing with energy. Each item in the room is alternately expanding and contracting, pulsing with life and energy. Colours are very intense and vivid, and the light seems to penetrate everything. Objects have an inner glow, which is I remember seeing things when I was a child. Lighting seems like that within the big top at the circus. This is a very high energy buzz, as well as intellectual, religious and physically feeling. Work feels effortless. I'm painting the ceiling of a very large room, and I feel invincible. Not violent at all, but very strong. I'm experiencing minor twitching convulsions, but they assist in the work. I'm used to this from previous soma experiences. I urinated, but did not drink it, which I admit I have done in the past. I'm so high right now that I don't feel it's necessary to extend or enhance this trip. I tried to turn off my cell phone, but I just couldn't figure out how. I had this sudden urge to conserve the battery. This is the greatest drug in the world. I feel God pulsing through my muscles. I just realised to myself, anyone can dance to every song because the beat itself is God. The pulse of energy that emanates through everything is God, and I am dancing with it, literally. God is a mushroom, or rather, God created the mushroom so that man could participate in God's consciousness. Here began a long period of time where the word God was continually repeated in my mind, although it took a long time subjectively before I realised it. The situation was I was sitting on the couch downstairs with this tremendous buzz going on. Everything in the universe was just buzzing with energy, and I was on the verge of feeling overwhelmed. I had to sit down. All of a sudden I realised that the sound of the buzz was the word God. The meaning of the phrase, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God," becomes crystal clear to me in this moment. I had become one with God. I'm not talking about a sublime intellectual experience. This was the most astounding, powerful, and awe-inspiring experience I have ever had. I'm not a scholar on Soma, although I've read a half-dozen books on the topic. But this was, I believe, a peak religious experience. I can easily imagine how people in ancient times would be in awe of this mushroom. I had the distinct sense that the mushroom was identifying itself through my consciousness as God. After this, which was probably 5 or 6 hours into the trip, I began to have heavier convulsions and twitching, and resumed painting. However, I was dropping the paint roller at a fairly regular interval. I began to notice that the convulsions were cycling through my body, and I started to worry just a little bit that they would affect my heart. For example, my hand would twitch, then my feet, then my arms, and I was afraid that my heart would stop when its turn came up. But after my legs buckled and I did not fall, I recovered very quickly. I stopped worrying about that. I also knew, because generally my memory was good, that this mushroom isn't a killer per se. Au contraire, it is my protector and my counsellor. Another idea, mentioned above, is that somehow Soma is God's means of experiencing, through man's mind, the joy of being itself. It's hard to describe, but I had the distinct impression that somehow God is only able to experience its existence vicariously. Somehow human beings and other sentient beings are the lenses through which God views existence, the mushroom being the catalyst. For some reason, the time frame of 350 million years kept running through my mind. This may be from one of Terence McKenna's books, but the idea that Soma is very, very ancient was in my head to begin with. I also went through short periods of time where I was just standing and swaying, looking around and getting off on the trip. I didn't have heavy visuals, no walls melting, etc. But one interesting feature was seeing the electrons, or something akin to them, within the air in front and all around me. They were very, very tiny multicoloured points, almost like gnats, but lots of them flying around. Similar to the stars one sees with a bump to the head. Very strange. I knew at this point that I was totally stoned, and I decided I was done with painting the ceiling. Also, I knocked the radio on the floor and couldn't figure out how to get it working again. Definitely impaired. Finally, at 3 AM, I went to bed. I was glad that I'd stopped when I did, as far as not taking more. I had a somewhat similar experience 20 years ago in Cubensis, but that was more of a classic bad trip with things melting and many negative fears intruding on the buzz. This experience was generally 99% positive, with little or no fear. The twitching seems to be a component of the Soma buzz for me, so I'm not fearful of that effect. I certainly wouldn't drive or operate any heavy equipment of any kind on a trip like this, Even a paint roller was too much at the later stages. Also, this would be an incredible experience, I believe, outside in nature. In hindsight, I should have walked outside and looked around, but it was 3 AM and I was covered in paint, and the dogs would have woken up as well. All in all, this was an astounding trip. I still had another dose left, maybe another 9 grams, 1 large full cap and 2/5 of another cap. Now that would be an intense trip. But the question for me at this point is when. This stuff is so strong, it's not something I would do every day or even every week. One other tip from Donald Teeter's works is don't drink carbonated beverages with soma, and I found out this the hard way, that doing so will often lead to nausea. As it is, I drink milk with the shrooms, and rarely, if ever, experience nausea. Again, no carbonated beverages. Take care, folks, and give your respect to soma. The Infinite Source of Life, posted by Warfrat, April 23rd, 2003. Hello to all you spirit seekers. I read many of the reports about Amanita. Many of the people that have disconnected from reality on this mushroom have not remembered their total experience. For most people, I believe this to be a good thing, because what I have seen on these mushrooms is not for the weak of mind. A friend of mine had come across some of these and invited me over. After arriving at his, I was in awe of the size and colour, but thought that they must be alright. I proceeded to ingest 1 fat cap of the stuff, about 7.5 to 8 grams. I waited around for about 30 minutes and started getting a strange rush similar to a cubensis trip. I walked to another friend's house, which was about a half-hour away, and after sitting there for about half an hour, I felt that I was beginning to plateau already and was going to get nothing more from it. So I decided to eat a little more, another cap smaller than the last. It was about 10 minutes after this that I started to actually trip. My vision was blurred as though I was drunk, and I felt a small tinge of the psychedelic mind. Some girl who was there ended up giving me and a friend of mine a ride back to the house, and it was by this time that I felt very uneasy about how my trip was going to go. Reality seemed to be shifting into a whole new dimension entirely. Lots of heat coming from my body, and I was drenched in sweat. I just lay down to try to get the queasiness in my stomach to go away. After a while, my symptoms cleared a bit, so I decided to go in the other room with my sister. It was at this time my vision of the world started to slip away. I started to feel like I was being sucked into another world. I don't really know how to explain all that. But then, there was a point of total darkness, even though I was aware of everything. Time began to have no meaning, and seconds seemed like eons. For every second that passed, I experienced life through everyone's eyes, and I do mean everyone. It was as if I was stuck in that dream where you're falling, and you know you're going to hit something, but you never do. You just wake up. But when I hit, I felt like I became one with God. I was God. I was God, and I was looking in a mirror judging myself, my creation, the whole of existence. This was the end of time, and I was sublimely happy with life and everything I'd done. And as soon as I realised all this, I got sucked back through time to the infinite source of life, the very beginning of time itself. The key to life was sound, the word of God. Interestingly enough, it was the letter I, though I think it was more the meaning than the actual sound. So I was bouncing through time from front to back, and each time it was different. But every time, there was a middle point which was my physical death. There's so much more that I can't type here because there really aren't words for it. But if you're thinking about doing these mushrooms, be warned that I found all of these visions really terrifying. But after looking back, I really am glad that I ended up doing it. Peace. Controlling the Void, posted by Dazed Confused, October 23rd, 2007. After receiving my order of grade A Amanitas from a very good online source, I was anxious to try them out. Here is what happened to me. I'm 21 years old, 6'3", 140 pounds by the way. Starting around 9:30 at night, I ate 3 caps at intervals of 20 minutes. After about 30 minutes of eating the last one, I began to sweat and feel really fidgety. A little after that, I felt nauseous. I'd read that some people would vomit, and during this time I kept thinking about that, and that just made my stomach feel even worse. I held off as long as I possibly could, then went into the bathroom and threw up. Immediately my stomach felt better, and I didn't get sick for the remainder of the trip. In fact, I feel as if throwing up was probably a good thing, and I doubt it had any effect on the level of the trip whatsoever. I was pretty sweaty and twitchy for about the next hour while laying in bed, and I noticed distorted vision and difficulty typing. A small feeling of the pulsing in my head had started during this time as well. I kind of blamed this pulsating on my ceiling fan, believe it or not. It was just in my range of sight while lying there, and the pulsing seemed to follow the same pattern and speed as the fan. The pulsing grew stronger. It was going in this pattern in my head of front, right side, back, left side. As this grew stronger and stronger, it got a little annoying and uncomfortable, so I turned off the lights and laid in bed. At some point, this pulsing turned into the never-ending thought loop that others talk about, and at first it was unpleasant. But after a while, I somehow gained control of it, and was able to make my mind turn to these incredible things. It was like I could control infinite amounts of time in an instant, passing forwards and backwards through large expanses of time at my own will. I kept trying to find out what lies at the end of time, but I was never able to, as there was always something more, and this made me realize that time really is infinite. I kept going from the beginning to the end of time in our universe and every other universe conceivable, which I was somehow able to connect with entirely. It was amazing how I could do this at variable speeds. It was as if I had somehow gained control over existence. I was also able to control feeling all over my body as these waves of time pulsated. It was like having some weird energy pulsing from head to toe and back. I could also make myself feel whatever I wanted, but mostly I felt nothing, because my mind was so focused on the void. Many people report that this part of the trip is like hell. I'll admit that at first it seemed like it was never ending, and I was in some weird state of death. But as soon as I gained control of it, it was unbelievably amazing. It was like I was in a deep trance, answering all the questions in the universe about God, life, death, and reality. Unfortunately though, I can't remember exactly how I was able to gain control of the void. But eventually, after traversing it for some unknown amount of time, I gained control of my body again, and time was extremely weird. I went to my computer and did some typing experiments. I would look at my keyboard and tap the H key for just an instant, but then when I looked at the screen, a long row of H's would be up there. I imagine if someone was watching me, it would have looked like I was moving slower than a zombie. I tried typing out trip notes at this point, but coherent typing was unfortunately pretty much impossible. Everything was moving and time was very screwed up. I vaguely remember going downstairs and getting a glass of orange juice for some reason, and having an incredibly difficult time drinking it. At some point, roughly around 1 or 2 in the morning, I made it to bed and fell asleep, though I do not actually remember this. I awoke at 6 in the morning and felt fine for the most part. My head was still a little weird, but not very much. Overall, I didn't experience much in the way of visual hallucinations, but I was in the dark for most of the time, and my vision was definitely distorted. I'd say this was way more of a mental and introspective trip. It seems to me that in a strong Amanita trip, time is the most affected thing. I would love to know why this is, and get more information on it. Amanita and the Void, posted by Agent 23, April 4th, 2002. I tried Amanita Muscaria, and for that trip, I took 15 grams of dried mushrooms. The trip seemed slow for a while during the time I was awake. For a while, I didn't feel much except very mild nausea when I sat down. It was hardly noticeable and easy to ignore. The nausea would subside if I got up or thought about something else. I walked around my house and attended to some ordinary tasks with no problem. I even went outside to see if I would have a greater connection to natural energies. I found that my connection was normal, and I really felt the same. I went back inside to try to sit down to feel the effects. I was a little jittery, and sometimes it became hard to focus. I noticed that I didn't feel particularly good, but didn't feel like eating or sleeping. However, I did try to sleep, but I just couldn't feel it. It was by now I noticed that I wasn't feeling very trippy like LSD or cubensis. I felt more like there was a void that I couldn't really reach, and my mind was just trying to do things. I decided to leave the house to see how I would make it. I drove to the gas station with no problem at all. When I picked up a drink and was looking at other drinks, I dropped the bottle. I noted it was because some feeling had left my body that this happened, so I bought another drink and went home, reminding myself to pay attention so as to not have another accident. When I got home, I felt like the trip wasn't going to do much else, so I smoked some pot and went outside again. I only felt a slightly better connection to natural energies, so I got bored again and soon went to bed. My dreams, though, were quite adventurous. There was something like a train of advanced technology, as if it was from the future. It could travel into the future and would then become another piece of advanced technology. Every time I went to the future, the technology would be advanced, and therefore my vehicle would change shape. After a while, I had something like a spacecraft, only I could also travel in other dimensions. I went into outer space. It wasn't like Star Trek. The fabric or stuff of space felt like a different texture on an interdimensional plane. It wasn't a physical pull in another dimension. The feel of it was different. I left the galaxy, and the colour of space was vibrating between black and yellow. I had a companion with me, and I said to him, "I need to learn more about the physics of the space before I travel further." My insights into the mushroom were that we take the sacred plants so that they can have a human experience, and we take them so that we can have a plant experience simultaneously. I also discovered that Amanita shows you a void, but you don't get to be part of the void. It's like everything gets stuffed up in front, and you cannot draw from the back of your head. I believe there is a part of the subconscious that gives you another dimension to work with, but with Amanita, you don't get that. You can only work with what you know. It takes away body awareness, but you do not feel like Floating Journey by Jerry H. Posted December 25th, 2016. My experience with this mushroom comes from a completely spiritual or mystical path, and I in no way suggest anyone try this themselves. I've been on this somewhat mystical path around 45 years, but only recently I've been revived around 8 months ago, culminating in a state of enlightenment and intimacy. While I dropped acid and mescaline a couple times in the 60s, I've pretty much been drug-free since then, except for weed. When a small patch of these guys grew practically in my yard, when my wife discovered them and pointed them out, they'd already been damaged by a kid pulling the heads off. So I gathered all of them as I could and read up on the highly mythical origins of the shroom. They're pretty rare here, and I became convinced these were meant for me. Knowing my spiritual resurgence, my wife and daughter agreed. My prep was to take all I had gathered and put it in my dehydrator sliced thinly. I then ground it to powder and used a tea method to seep it. My total yield was right about 20 grams. After consuming them all, it started to take effect around 45 minutes later. The first couple hours were a lot of muscle spasms and jerking, but no nausea or vomit. A deep sleep state and a carnal state would best describe it, let's say. But then I awoke, and was somewhat coherent and managed to make it 10 foot to use the bathroom, still jerking muscle control. I remember seeing the clock, and it was now 7 hours later. And this is when the real trip started. My intimacy at this point is in normal life constant with a loving God that I can turn off and on at will. Going into this was very much an act of love. So as I went into this, it was like a gentle parent, but caressing me inside with the deep love I know so well. It was like going under for surgery and fading away while holding the hand. I saw a cinder block type room, and I could see and hear myself pressed all the way to the ceiling. I could go no further now. My voice began to fade out as I drifted away from that room, and I could see an empty cinder block room above the one I was in appearing. Then a being of some sort firmly took my arm and started taking me somewhere. We were going really fast for a long time, and then I found myself alone in the other cinder block room. It was then after this that I heard the very loudest voice that I've ever heard in my life, repeating the words over, and it was reverberating or echoing, and I also saw the words but could not quite remember them. I started screaming these jumbles of words, and as I got up and was jumping up and down, I had to tell my wife through so much effort of constantly dropping my phone and inability to type that I was able to send it, and that was around 1 hour later. The trip went on once I settled, and it was mostly trying to process it. I think I was given the reason why it seemed I was taking a great distance, but what the being was doing was putting me in another time dimension, like I needed to be in the same time as the speaker. Not really too sure why. My throat was hoarse and raw from screaming the words the next day. Like I said, it was a very spiritual journey, and though I'd love to go back, I think I'd still need it to be just as special as this was. I would never go uninvited personally. This mushroom absolutely deserves its mystical reputation. This was the greatest single spiritual event of my 61 years on Earth, and I've had a lot of these events, not even drug related. I'm still processing the words, but for sure, my life has changed. The reality was only in dots. Posted by Dillinger, July 21st, 2013. I'm attempting to write this while on Amanita mushrooms right now. I've been on it for almost 3.5 hours. I'm making many typos, and if I leave any, feel free to correct them. This trip is life-changing. I've never tripped before though, I've only smoked weed and drank. This is so unlike anything, but I will try to explain it. Now I'm fading down. I feel very stoned and I'm shivering cold and sweating. The trip tells me things against reality. I feel a different existence every few seconds and have to fight it with my consciousness. Earlier, I had no consciousness to fight with. Reality became not two-dimensional, one-dimensional. Everything in a certain reality would exist at a certain altitudinal level. One level, like a circle across the world. Nothing up or down, only the one level. The reality I was in would even come with numbers, and I'm not exactly sure where the numbers came from, but a certain height to reality would be 3, and then all became 3. All of life, the universe, became that flat circle that resembled the number 3. At one point during the trip, I came upon the most intense feeling I've ever had, hands down. There is nothing that could possibly ever explain this. The reality I was in was composed of only dots. The universe, God, and all of reality existed within a single white dot, akin to a singularity. And the white dot was all of reality, and it kept moving around the center of the sphere. And I would know about the real reality, but I didn't believe it. I could still see the trip, everything in one spot, all of time, all the answers, everything was within that dot. And as it spun around, I was this dot, I must add, so I was spinning with it. It neared to the top of its sphere, the apex on a sphere, the very top of which a dot can exist upon a sphere, and all of reality was held within this dot upon the sphere of everything, which also became increased in time. The dot, the higher it was, the further in time it was, and as it reached the top, I saw what was happening, and I fought it. I then became everything, the universe, the being, the entirety of it, and I was on top of the end of time. I entered infinity. I truly saw and experienced infinity. And here, everyone knew infinity existed. You knew it, but it kept going on forever. You cannot return from infinity. I truly believed I would experience this, not for life, but as infinity itself. I thought that this was the actual life. Oh my god, that was the most amazing thing I have ever been through. The extremes of all within a single dot. I experienced infinity, the answer to life, and it scared the shit out of me, I'm going to be honest, but it fascinated me beyond belief. This trip is in circles, new realities that I believe each time, and the circle makes everything within it. It is really not explainable within human language. Everything was in the altitudinal dimension, no flat surfaces in front of me, only like tabletops. I'm not sure when the real trip started, but I know right now it is 1:15 AM. We ate a 5-gram cap each and shared a 10-ish gram cap, about 10 grams. Felt like I'd been smoking weed after about 40 minutes. It was a light buzz and I drove home. Very paranoid and very stupid of me to be out, but I didn't think it would have hit yet. I had a minor buzz at 40 minutes, major cannabis-like buzz around 10:30, and I think I tripped at around 11. My parents are home, sleeping downstairs, and though I am paranoid to wake them up, I am attempting to be silent. I know we made a lot of noise bumping into things and shutting doors, and talking in the other world without realising it for minutes at a time. They really are right when they say to start small. This is major, like nothing ever experienced. It showed me a different life, universe, and existence entirely. It is scary, but definitely amazing. Near-Death Experience by Amanita Muscaria, posted March 19th, 2007. I started with 2.5 caps of Muscaria mixed with a single beer. I had bought them online. They were grown and air-dried. I was sent about 8 caps and all had white warts on them. About 1 hour after I took them, I was feeling good and at one with the universe. About an hour and a half after I'd taken them, I started to see things. I saw a yellow bus speed past me and it was very large. Unfortunately, at that point, I couldn't even stand. Then my babysitter said to me, "If you're okay, then please just say something so I'll know." He kept repeating himself. I knew he really wanted me to do something, but I couldn't figure out what it was that he wanted, so I kept picking apart his sentence. And somehow through doing this, I made the universe fall out of existence, to which I then brought it back to existence, to which it then fell out of existence again. Then it began existing and not existing very, very rapidly, until I finally figured out that he wanted me to just say something. I thought I recalled him picking me up at that point. He says that he never picked me up though. The next thing I know, I was walking in the park and my legs completely went out on me. I got back up and tried to walk. My legs went out again, only this time I really hurt my ankle. I started to cry almost hysterically. Somehow my babysitter calmed me down and made me sit by a tree. This is my last actual memory. Nothing past this I can remember at all. My babysitter told me the last thing I said was that there is a fly flying in my eye. I can't help but think that this may have had something to do with the legend that if you eat the Amanita muscaria, you will see the Lord of the Flies. My sitter said that I then became completely unresponsive. No one could wake me up or get me to talk. And after a while, he got so worried that he called 911. At the hospital, they ran every test on me possible. Spinal tap, MRI, pregnancy, blood. But apparently they didn't ever find out that I'd taken Amanitas. They thought I'd just drank too much beer. During the course of the night, my entire body swelled and I wasn't breathing right. And my heart wasn't beating right either. And they repeatedly had to sedate me because I was trying to rip my breathing tube out. Of course, my parents got to sit in the room and watch all of this unfold. The next morning, I woke up in a hospital room that I had never ever seen before, with about 6 people I had never seen before either. When I got home, I saw a fly for the first time in our house just sitting on the mirror. I've seen them here and there in our house ever since. They now have a very deep and spiritual meaning to me now. They, in a way, represent death to me. The Gold Realm and White Room of Crucifixion, an Amanita Muscaria trip report, posted by Space Elf to earwid.org, December 25th, 2012. The following trip reports are two accounts of my most profound Amanita Muscaria experiences. These experiences consist of what are commonly referred to as breakthroughs. A breakthrough dose is one which seemingly takes you into another dimension. The purpose of these reports is to inform everyone about the mystical potential of the Amanita mushroom. These reports also serve as a warning. Amanita gave me the most insightful, profound experiences of my life. They also gave me the most terrifying and probably the most physically painful experiences of my life as well. Trip report number 1. Back in the spring of 2007, I purchased a quarter pound of Amanita Muscaria caps from an online ethnobotanical vendor. For several days I experimented with different doses of these mushrooms. I had previously read reports of a mystical realm one enters after ingesting a very high dose of Amanita. My intent was to access this realm, and thus I continued to take increasingly higher doses each day. I failed to access this realm consecutively for 2 days in a row. Each time I ate around 20 dry grams, but I always ended up vomiting and falling into a deep sleep. By the third day and third attempt to access this mystical realm, I was determined to succeed. My supply of Amanita caps was beginning to run out. I waited until close to sunset to begin my journey. I weighed out 30 dry grams and proceeded to eat a few large caps. After eating 3 caps in a row, the nausea began to affect me and the urge to vomit became overpowering. I realised I would not be able to eat anymore. Thus, I decided to consume the rest in the form of tea. I ground the remaining caps into a powder and boiled them in water on my stovetop. The water quickly turned a deep reddish brown colour. After boiling the tea for about 15 minutes, I poured the liquid through a mesh metal filter to separate the mushroom material from the tea. I then drank the tea very quickly, after which I lay down and waited for the tea to take effect. At this point, the first caps I ate had already begun to take effect. The first visual effects I noticed was that colours became brighter, and the size of objects became distorted. I looked down at my hand and it appeared to be very small and very far away from my face. I perceived what appeared to be transparent energy flowing through the air in a swirling pattern. I felt very tired and somewhat delirious. My body felt almost weightless, as if I was floating. I then experienced the sensation of slowly leaving my body through the top of my head. The tea I consumed gave me an intense urge to vomit. I managed to resist vomiting, although it was incredibly difficult to do so. The next sensation I experienced was the loss of feeling in my body. I became dissociated and could barely feel my feet on the ground. This is when I began losing visual contact with reality. It seemed as though I was going blind. I could barely make out the objects in my field of vision. They were slowly disappearing on me. Suddenly, the negative side effects of profuse sweating and extreme salivation began to occur. My clothes quickly became drenched from my sweat. Saliva was pouring out of my mouth very rapidly. I lay down on my bed, at which point I experienced extreme muscle twitching. The muscles all over my body were contracting uncontrollably. This is the last thing I remember before I fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how long I was in this deep sleep for. Upon awakening, I witnessed the incredible transition from this realm into another. Imagine a clock with only one hand on it at the 12 o'clock position. Now imagine the hand of the clock going all the way around and back to the 12 o'clock position. This is how the transition occurred. Reality elegantly folded like the hand on a clock. As it made its way back to the 12 o'clock position, a gold realm was left in its wake. In other words, when the hand was at the 6 o'clock position, there was a gold reality on the right side of my visual field, and normal reality on the left side, which quickly disappeared altogether. With the disappearance of reality, my body also disappeared, and I was left as a floating consciousness in a gold realm. I immediately realised that there was an object in this gold dimension. In front of me, there was a sphere hovering in midair, which was the same gold colour as the realm itself, My initial reaction was one of fear and panic. The thought I had died had crossed my mind quite a lot. I struggled to make sense of what I was experiencing. After about an hour, the gold dimension began to disappear. This is when I remembered that I had taken Amanita muscaria. I realised that the experience I was having was the result of consuming these mushrooms. After the gold realm faded out of my perception, I found myself in a similar realm, but instead of gold, everything was white. I looked down and could see my hands, and only my hands. I watched as my arms slowly began to reappear from the same emanating point where my hands first came back into my field of vision. Slowly but surely, my body began to reappear. I felt as though I was being reborn. After several hours, the white realm began to give way to normal reality, and I found myself back in a normal universe. Trip report number 2. The following experience occurred yesterday morning on October 2nd, 2010. The past few days I had gone out picking Amanita muscarias, Amanita muscaria variation famosa. I'd collected a couple pounds of them around pine trees. The first Amanitas I picked were dried overnight in front of a space heater. I then completed the drying process by curing the mushrooms in the oven at 175 degrees Fahrenheit to convert the ibotenic acid into muscimol, the psychedelic compound of Amanita muscaria. Yesterday morning, I decided to try out the Amanitas to determine their potency. I didn't actually plan on tripping at all. I intended on taking 10 dry grams solely for sleep aid purposes, but this turned out to be a huge mistake. I completely underestimated the potency of these mushrooms, which resulted in the most terrifying and probably the most physically painful experience of my life. Before going to bed, I weighed out 10 dry grams of Amanita caps. I crushed up the Amanitas and made tea out of them the same way I did in the previous trip report. I then consumed the tea and waited for about an hour. The effects were very subtle and hardly noticeable. I concluded that the mushrooms were far from potent, and then I went to sleep. I awoke from my sleep several hours later in extreme physical pain. I was horrified by what was happening. I found myself out of my body in a white realm with a red circle below me. I immediately began screaming from the pain and horror of my sudden realisation that I somehow died and was actually in hell. The pain was unbearable. I was screaming and pleading with God to release me from this eternal state of loneliness and physical pain. I had no idea that I was experiencing a different version of the Amanita muscaria breakthrough. I didn't detect any noticeable difference in my state of consciousness. I felt absolutely sober. In reality, I must have been flailing my arms and legs about, but I wasn't aware that I even had a body. Every time I swung my invisible arms and legs, I heard a ch sound. With each swing of my invisible arms and legs, the red circle below me became a little bit bigger. I realised that I had to continue making this circle continuously grow bigger in order to free myself, or at least that is what I hoped to accomplish. With every swing of my arms and legs, the pain in my invisible wrists and feet became excruciatingly more intense. It felt like there were nails piercing my wrists and feet, and that the ch sound was caused by me pounding the nails out of something. I couldn't see any nails or what they were attached to at all, and for over an hour I was frantically pounding these invisible nails out of my wrists and feet in order to make the red circle grow larger. The whole time I was screaming at the top of my lungs in pain. I kept asking God to forgive me for everything wrong I had done in my life. After what felt like an eternity, the red circle turned into something I could recognise. It was the wooden panels in my bedroom floor. A huge feeling of relief came over me. It was at this point that everything started to make sense. I realised I had unintentionally experienced a breakthrough from the mushroom tea. I also realised at this point that the experience I was having was a simulation of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. I understood that I had to keep pounding these nails out of an invisible cross which I was nailed to. I would be free once the task was completed. I estimate that it was only another 15 minutes of being nailed to the cross that I finally knocked the first nail out of my right wrist. I didn't see any nail fall out. I clearly heard a tink, tink, tink sound of a nail hitting my wooden floor. With one free arm, I proceeded to rip my other hand and feet free. There was one invisible nail in each wrist and one in each foot, 4 in all. Each time I knocked an invisible nail out, I heard it hit my floor. With my escape from the invisible cross, my bedroom began to come back into my perception. I began crying from the happiness of having escaped this hellish experience, and due to the gratitude I had for getting another chance at life. In conclusion, these experiences were the most profound, life-changing events of my life. I'm very grateful for these experiences, even though they were inexplicably traumatic. I will never be the same again after this. And if you think my experience sounds fun, you are gravely mistaken. I don't advise anyone to attempt replicating these experiences. I wrote this trip report in order to prevent anyone from making the same mistakes I did. For anyone who seriously wants to experiment with Amanita muscaria, be very careful in terms of dosage. As I found out, the potency of amanitas is highly variable and unpredictable. It is impossible to convey the seriousness of what I went through. Words do not do justice in articulating these experiences. Prior to having my first Amanita muscaria experience, I read theories that postulate that the sacrament of Jesus Christ, his flesh and blood, was a symbolic reference to the Amanita muscaria mushroom. It is believed that Jesus and his disciples use Amanita muscaria for religious significance. Many paintings typically portray Jesus and his disciples with a gold ball or halo behind their heads, and sometimes in a golden room. After my first breakthrough experience, I became a believer in the use of Amanita muscaria as the sacrament of Christ. My second breakthrough confirmed my belief. Although I was raised as a Christian, I began to reject the truth of this religion during my adolescence. At the very least though, these experiences showed me that Jesus must have been more than just an average spiritual teacher. I am now certain that there is much more truth to Christianity than I had assumed. Thank you for reading. A 35-gram Amanita muscaria trip report, posted by Eversonic to the Amanita muscaria subreddit 22 days ago. This took place around November 2021, I believe, so some details may be a little fuzzy, but I do remember most things about it. It was around 8:30 PM one night, and I wanted to use some form of psychoactive substance, but wasn't sure what to choose from my stash. I had a bunch of amanitas that I dried earlier in the week, Muscaria var persichinea, which I'd found locally near my house, and it had been a while since I'd last done any. I decided I was going to try a higher end dose and see what would happen. I scaled out about 35 grams of different size caps. I recommend doing this because caps can vary heavily in concentration despite the sizes, so it's good to use different size caps. I then added the amount, already dried, to some water mixed with lemon juice on the stove, because ibotenic acid converts into muscimol more readily in the presence of an acidic pH. I heated the water until it was boiling, and then turned it down until it was a light simmer. I let it simmer for about an hour, until I ended up with a super concentrated tea. It's important to simmer for a long time, because the heat is important in full conversion, along with the citric acid of course. I went up to my room and drank the tea. Muscaria tea has a horrible taste. It's like a mixture between wet old socks, rotten tomatoes and cardboard. By far one of the worst tasting entheogens out there. After getting through the tea, I kinda just hung out watching videos until I started noticing its effects. At first the effects were subtle. Mild drunkenness, but not quite like alcohol or other GABAergics like Z-drugs and benzos. It feels more unique. My vision started getting very blurry, and I felt a little bit nauseous. I was also sweating and salivating a lot because of the muscarine that's in Muscaria. The effects slowly started increasing along with the side effects, and I noticed that my room was starting to become unrecognisable and looked very distant. My surroundings felt fake, and the weird visuals starting to overlay my vision seemed more real than my life had ever been. The visuals I was experiencing were very Salvia-esque. Out of everything I've ever tried, nothing has ever really come close to the effects of Salvia, except Amanita's. The effects are extremely similar, but Muscaria is a little different in some ways that I can't really depict easily. My vision almost looked like there was a vignette forming around it. It was grey coloured, and it made it even harder to see and recognise my surroundings. I started seeing various colours folding and twisting in ways very similar to Salvia. I also had a similar body height to Salvia, and it felt like my body was segments and they were kind of moving slightly, twisting and folding, stretching back out. This feeling was pretty dysphoric, but I remember being so out of it that I didn't even really care at the time. It was around this time during the trip when the nausea kind of took hold over me, and I ended up purging. Amanita muscaria is extremely nauseating in high doses. I've done ayahuasca without purging, except for in high doses, so I wasn't expecting to feel this sick from Amanitas. After throwing up, I felt much better, but still had that dysphoric body high. Eventually, I ended up closing my eyes to see if there was any closed-eye visuals to experience. At first, there weren't really any. After a minute or two, I started to see something that appeared to be unravelling or unfolding in, again, a very Salvia-esque way. It, paired with the unfolding and unravelling body high that I was experiencing, and pretty soon I became the object that was unravelling with my eyes closed. At this point, I had zero awareness of who I was before taking the Amanitas. Complete ego dissolution. I had always been this thing that was unravelling, and I always would be. This thought was anxiety-inducing at first, because I thought I was going to be stuck like this forever. But eventually, I calmed down after accepting my fate. I don't quite know how to describe this, but I was witnessing this from two different perspectives. I was the thing that was unravelling, but at the same time, I was watching it happen from a third-person view from the outside. I was unravelling vertically, and I started to notice various colours the more this went on. Greens, blues, whites, browns, yellows, etc. After what seemed like an eternity, I reached the bottom of the space that I was in while unfolding constantly, and the process immediately started again, but horizontally this time. Same colours, same feelings, etc. This happened for what felt like several lifetimes, until I finally realised what was taking place. I was becoming the Earth. I was watching the Earth itself being created. I realised this because I was unfolding into a sphere shape, and the colours resembled the colours of the Earth. I started to see continents being formed, water, clouds. I was completely amazed by what I was experiencing. After the Earth was formed, this is kind of where I blacked out. I wish that more happened, because becoming the Earth was absolutely insane. But I have no memory of what happened after this. I blacked out and woke up in the morning. At first, I was shocked to be back in my own body, because I'd completely forgotten that I'd even existed. But I quickly adjusted back to being normal again after a bit. I felt extremely refreshed. I was calm and energised for the entire day after the experience. Would I personally recommend trying a dose this high? Absolutely not. This might potentially not be safe. I'm really recommending not to try this. However, for me, the experience was one of the most profound hallucinogenic experiences I've ever been through. I would say it was worth it for me, even though I didn't really gain anything insightful as a result of it. However, it's definitely something that I look back on quite fondly. The Godhead, an Amanita Muscaria trip report by Joe Schmo, posted to earwid.org January 16th, 2021. Dose: 14 grams of dried Amanita Muscaria caps. Weight: 130 pounds roughly. Method of ingestion: oral, simmered for 25 to 30 minutes and filtered through coffee filter into tea. Important notes before the trip. Some events may seem out of order, and this is because in this particular state of consciousness, or reality as I was experiencing it, the concept of time was non-existent. Instead, events happen at the same time, and are then shown in a particular order for the sake of my comprehension. 2. Some events or information may contradict. And 3. This is still a fresh experience. Happened about 3 nights ago as of writing this. Things still need to be processed fully. At around 4 PM Friday evening, I received a package of what was labelled as Grade A+ Amanita Muscaria caps from Washington. 14 grams. I've been checking the USPS tracking, so I knew it would come that day, so I prepped myself beforehand. Fasting for 6 hours, meditation throughout the day to clear any negative thoughts, and a quick walk to clear my mind as well, knowing I'd be consuming this mushroom today. I opened the package and found 5 small to medium mushrooms, ranging from 1 inch to 1.5 inches. The colourings were almost a brownish yellow to a nice deep orange, with quite a few membrane spots. Near 5 PM, I took all 5 small to medium cracker dry caps and put them into my mortar and pestle and began grinding them up. After about an hour or so, the amanitas were now a fine powder with just very small bits and chunks in them. At 6:10, I set the powder in a small pot of water, simmering for 30 minutes and stirring frequently. T plus 0 hours. At 6:45, I put an album on and take a sip between each song, as I want to drink the brew slowly. After 20 minutes, the tea is gone, and I lay down and close my eyes. T plus 45 minutes. At the moment, I'm not sure if it's just a placebo effect or not, but I feel my thought process is slightly different, almost a bit more analytical, simply thinking deeper. T plus 2 hours and 40 minutes. I must have either fallen asleep or been lost in thought completely. A call from my neighbour wanting to hang out snapped me back into it. Not realising what state I was in currently, I said yes, and was later told that my words were slurred. I hung up the phone and then stood up out of bed. I immediately noticed a loss of equilibrium, as well as the breathing wall effect, i.e. pulsating or breathing walls, objects, etc. Somewhat similar to alcohol intoxication, although without the nausea or discomfort. I laid back down and closed my eyes once again. T plus unknown. Before I know it, I am under the trance of an interesting hallucination. There is absolutely nothing but a single black dot in the middle of whiteness. I had no body, I was just consciousness. I look at this point, and something inside me just tells me not to go below it. Something else tells me to move. So I start moving away from this point for what felt like only a few minutes, and found what I believed to be the same dot or point. I was slightly confused, so I moved on once again. And, once again, I found the same point. It did not feel like I was going in a circle, or around a sphere. In fact, I somehow knew that this nothingness was infinite. I then kept saying to myself something along the lines of, "Oh, it just keeps going," or "it never ends." These phrases resonated with me in some way. As of right now, I'm not sure why though. I'd also like to point out that I know that this was a hallucination and not a dream, due to the fact that at one point during this, I very, very slightly faded back into reality and saw my legs kicking in my bed. T plus unknown. After a little while of this infinite loop, I stopped at the little black dot and simply watched it. The black dot tilted away and towards me, 90 degrees, so that it then became a line. The line then shrunk into another dot, and the cycle repeated for a while, until reversing. Eventually, it went from a 2-dimensional circle and formed into a 3-dimensional sphere. This happened many, many times, almost infinitely, in an instant until the spheres formed a molecule. It was then clear to me that what I was witnessing was a 3-dimensional creation at its simplest form. At this point, these molecules formed infinitely, and I took a step back to see what they were forming. What I saw was a memory of me having a talk with a friend. We were having a philosophical discussion about religion. At one point during the conversation we had, I said, "Who knows? I could be God, you could be God." And this is where everything got incredibly intense. T plus unknown. As soon as the words, "I could be God," came out of my mouth, I lost knowledge of language. I didn't know how to speak, though I did understand the concept of words. Suddenly the word "forgot" popped into my mind. That was the only word I knew. So I began thinking as hard as I can, trying to figure out what it is I forgot. Slowly, I started remembering words, word by word. I remembered them in an order that would form a sentence. I slowly started forming the sentence. This is how it started. And other similar sentences along those lines, like, this is what happened at the beginning. And as I remember each word, it comes with a memory to remember as well. The memories are almost like the life of the universe, in reverse chronological order, until the last memory and word. The memory being some sort of God or creator looking at the universe and saying, I want to experience this. The last word being forget. I am now in a blank nothingness. In my own mind, maybe. I ask myself a million questions in an instant. Hard questions like, what is life? Why is the universe? What is the point? And I gave the same exact answer for all of them. The thing is, my answer, as I conceived it at least, was beyond language. It has infinite meaning. The only thing that comes closest in linguistics, though again nowhere near the answer I gave, is the phrase, whatever you want. It may seem simple, and it is, but at the same time, a person can write for 100 years straight and not fully portray the 2-second answer. T plus unknown to T plus 13 hours and 15 minutes. I am in the same blank space, but looking in on the universe from the outside. I say I, because at this point it feels as if it isn't even me, and I'm seeing through the eyes of another entity. The layout of the universe is in the concept of the no motion theory, where it states that if you take a single point in time, there is no motion, meaning there is no motion at any point in time. With that being said, it was, essentially, a model of the universe depicting every single point in time that has occurred or will occur. This entity points to a specific area. This location in the universe and around this specific time. I then witness the birth of creation, again, and then every single point in time up to the point I wake up. I'm awake now, and the time is a little past 8 AM. T plus 13 hours and 15 minutes. As I awake, I shoot straight up out of bed in shock, wondering if I'd just experienced what I'd actually experienced. Physically, I feel very rejuvenated, but mentally I'm quite confused. I step out of bed, walk around, hold my arms out, and touch various things around my room to see if I'm still tripping. After I realise that I'm back in my own reality, the confusion is replaced with positive awe and disbelief. TLDR version. I ate some mushrooms and I saw the universe being born. And I was also God or something. Conclusion. It's been about a month after the trip, and what a trip that was. This is the first time I've experienced the Godhead, and I gotta say, absolutely mind-blowing. I got a lot out of this experience, especially spiritually, and I'm usually not a spiritual or religious person. I didn't expect anything like this to happen, but not disappointed at all. As a matter of fact, I would try this sacred mushroom again. A true 10 out of 10 experience. A Sublime Journey. An Amanita Muscaria and Hawaiian Baby Woodrose trip report. Posted by Earth Traveller to Irwid.org January 4th, 2019. Amanita Muscaria mushrooms have been used for centuries to alter consciousness by shamans in Siberia and other cultures. Occasionally, I found beautiful specimens among the pines in the backyard of my Wyoming mountain home, before they're harvested by squirrels. This spring's weather conditions produced an unprecedented huge crop of large ones, some the size of tea saucers. They appeared just as I had begun reading Michael Pollan's fascinating study of psychedelics history and ongoing research, How to Change Your Mind. The synchronicity was my green light suggesting it was finally time to experiment again, so I gathered and dried a batch of Amanitas. In the early 60s, I took a couple of trips with morning glory seeds. The first time I prepared well, had a good guide, and had a transcendent experience. My second trip though was awful, because I wasn't careful enough about set and setting, and took the drug out of curiosity rather than as a sacrament. The last of my 6 LSD trips was in the early 70s. Aside from cannabis, that was the extent of my drug experimentation. For the last several years, I'd been feeling a growing urge to once again try an entheogen, a drug that causes one to become inspired or to experience feelings of inspiration, often in a religious or spiritual manner. I've studied Tai Chi for over 45 years, and have faithfully practiced meditation, mostly Buddhist insight meditation, for over 40 years. I'd been feeling stuck in my meditation practice for a while, and hoped a mushroom journey would help me find a way through that. Although the fluidity of the sense of self is familiar territory to me by now, I believed the mushroom would also make that more clear, and it did. In order to be a better guide for me, the trusted friend who agreed to be my anchor read Pollen's book, and took a mushroom journey by himself a couple weeks before mine. He lives in a gorgeous rural setting, far from neighbours, with a river running through the backyard, a perfect retreat space. Around 9:30 am on September 12, 2018, I carefully chewed up a medium-sized mushroom, 1 medium cap of Amanita, and 4 Hawaiian baby wild rose seeds, chemically similar to morning glory seeds. I included the seeds because my friend had taken them on his mushroom trip and had a powerful positive experience. The mushroom tasted earthy and unique, and the seeds had little taste, and I started experiencing a perceptual shift within minutes. So much happened during my mushroom journey that the following day I thought I could write an extremely long story or a short novel about it. Instead, I've had difficulty writing anything at all. The experience was so profound that words can barely hint at the reality. The day was sublime and magnificent, and I spent much of it in awe. Recalling it continues to inspire awe as well. Because of my meditation practice, I encountered nothing unfamiliar. Yet like looking at things through a microscope or a telescope, the ordinary was transformed into the extraordinary. My primary goal was to ask the mushroom's help in exploring some habitual physical knots. In particular, one calf muscle I've been trying to loosen for years with little success. When my friend massaged it, his touch released a stream of childhood memories involving my large, close, extended family. I was transported to a family farm and searched through memories and feelings until settling on a painful incident involving a cousin's betrayal. The accompanying humiliation was apparently the source of my leg discomfort. I have yet to understand the connection fully, and there's been no noticeable change in the muscle. Touch on the other knee brought up memories of its own physical injury, which also happened around that time, involving another cousin. I was surprised to discover many tight muscles in that calf as well. I've been exploring that injury's physical consequences since the memory came up in Tai Chi years ago, but I paid little attention before to the emotional aspects of the memory. I now recalled humiliation. Growing up in Wyoming with great pressure to cowboy up, tough it out, be a man, and above all, don't be a sissy and cry. While exploring my calf muscles a few days later, I remembered the phrase, to cut someone off at the knees, defined as, to squelch or humiliate suddenly and thoroughly. And this made perfect sense. I spent much of the day thinking about my many cousins and countless other people I love. Each person I thought of seemed quite present, in a state where time and space were far more elastic. As I lay on my back on the grass under a favourite tree, listening to the river, watching the blue sky and clouds through shimmering leaves, each falling leaf seemed like a jolly little reminder to wake up. I felt profound love for the tree, which had provided me welcome shade on many summer days and opportunities to watch nesting birds. I realised that everything in nature can be a teacher if we just slow down enough to truly pay attention to the natural world, including the body itself. Many insights came while thinking about my Tai Chi students and how I might teach them more effectively. I realised that we contract our neck muscles in reaction to thoughts of both superiority and inferiority. When we feel inferior or unworthy, the mid-back bends forward, the shoulders round in submission and defensiveness, and the neck pinches. When we feel superior, we tighten the mid-back, pull the shoulders back, and tilt the head back in conceit, pinching the neck. In addition to moulding customary posture, this dynamic also happens at subtle levels from moment to moment, as our thoughts constantly swing from one pole to the other, finally coming to rest only when the ego is silent. I came to regard the mushroom as a wise, benevolent guide and helper. It reminded me frequently to notice the tensions in my belly as well. Although I never actually felt nauseated, throughout the day I felt countless gentle upchuck impulse signals to slow down, pay attention, and relax the abdominal muscles. The closest I came to nausea was in response to my friend's suggestion that I take a later booster dose of mushrooms, which I declined. The subtle nausea signals continued to a lesser degree 3 weeks later, repeatedly showing me how habitually I hold unnecessary belly tensions. Over and over I was reminded to let go of any resistance as soon as I noticed it. I was pleasantly surprised by how functional I was throughout the day, and the experience bolstered my confidence in my ability to deal with whatever may come my way. My friend said later that I was unusually gregarious and extroverted. I became very talkative, and was aware that my unusual behaviour was sometimes unsettling to him. I got plenty of practice watching my impulse to apologise. Years ago at a 3-week meditation retreat, a new group of people joined us halfway through. Their much faster energy felt like being in a swarm of bees or a herd of buffalo. Similarly, during my mushroom journey, my friend's pace seemed like sitting next to a busy freeway. When I went to bed at 11 that night, my mind was still so active that I didn't fall asleep for a couple more hours, well past my usual bedtime. In the course of my mushroom journey, I offered up 2 prayers. May I be a clear channel for this love, and may this understanding continue. The increased level of sensitivity and body awareness does continue. Whenever I slow down enough, I can easily find my way back to that awareness. When I step outdoors, nature clears my mind more easily than before. After a lifetime of soap opera drama and angst, much of my time in recent years is spent in peaceful bliss. My mushroom experience taught me a different way of seeing, making that state easier to access. I'd like to take another journey in solitude, perhaps next spring, to see how that changes the experience. Next time I'll skip the Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. Wondering whether a dried mushroom qualifies as a living being right now. I recall the Buddha's encouragement to avoid holding on to the idea that a self, a person, a living being or a lifespan exists. But nonetheless, I imagine the mushroom as a friend, living under the soil in the backyard, now asleep for the winter. First I met God, then I was God. An Amanita Muscaria trip report by Synthesis, uploaded to earwid.org, April 5th, 2011. Prelude. I'd taken a philosophy class called Comparative Religions, and I was also currently taking a class called Philosophy of Science. I regard the latter as a bit of waste of time, as we largely talked about what can be known, perception, and various other completely subjunctive things. Every week we have to write a single-spaced, one-page paper, and in my most recent paper, I'd brought up the futility of the free will versus determinism debate, see subjectivity. I also had recently done some reading about theories on the origin of the universe. The comparative religions class was useful, in that I learnt that I don't need to be able to find an organised religious body that is in line with what I believe and what I am like personality-wise. I can find my own path instead. Unfortunately, I didn't have anyone I knew that could fill the role of a sitter, so I was alone in my room, where I spent most of my time anyway. Intermezzo. My previous attempts involved roughly 12 grams and 16 grams of dried, commercially available Amanita Muscaria. Nothing happened both times though. Of course, all my research suggested that something definitely should have happened, especially at those doses. Some accounts I had read cited 5 to 15 grams as being more than the user had bargained for. In reality, the potency of these mushrooms varies substantially, making them risky for first-timers, Later on, I bought another 28 grams, but of a lower grade. I thought about doing a 20 to 22 gram dose, but that would have left me with a useless 6 to 8 grams of a leftover dose based on previous experience. So, I foolishly ingested the whole 28 grams on an empty stomach. It was about 30 minutes later when I started to feel sick to my stomach. I ate a few tortilla chips since I'd eaten the mushrooms on an empty stomach thinking that would help. It didn't, but keeping still seemed to help. I decided to lie down on my bed. I closed my eyes and began to feel relaxed. I started into a state of daydreaming, hypnagogia. My breathing was slightly depressed, and as I was breathing, I imagined 4 tanks of air as if it were an icon in the lower right corner of a video game, and as I breathed out, I filled the 4 tanks. The next thing I recall was that I experienced the creation of the universe to its heat death in a single blink of the eye, over and over and over again. I pretty much had reached a delirious, poisoned state. The strange thing was, though, that there was this brief pain sensation associated with the process. It was as if my fragile human psyche couldn't handle the concept of infinity. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the repetitiveness clued me into the fact that I was tripping. After a while, I thought I had died and merged with God. Then, I thought I was God, but it wouldn't stop. I thought, oh, please God, make it stop. But I was God, and it wouldn't stop at all. I thought I had died and gone to hell. I started freaking out. I couldn't see and wasn't aware of having a mouth and a voice. I tried to will myself out of the trip with each successive creation of the universe, but it didn't work. I could feel the keys and wallet in my pockets. I could feel the carpet on the floor, but all I experienced was the Big Bang, over and over. To this very day, I couldn't tell you if my eyes were open or closed throughout the experience. I believe I eventually got used to the painful sensation I felt before, or that it went away by itself. I was experiencing infinity, and began to play little games to keep from going crazy. Don't ask me how I know this, but what would happen is that I would tell the Jews I was Yahweh, the Christians I was Jesus, the Muslims I was Allah, the Hindus I was Brahman, the Chinese I was the Tao, and so on and so forth. Can't remember what else I tried, but every time, everything would happen just the way it happened before, and I couldn't change anything. It was like I, as God, was always one step ahead of me. Each time the universe was created, everything happened exactly the same, exactly the way it was supposed to happen. I did eventually come down, about 2 hours after I'd laid down. However, this repeating motif continued as I experienced coming down and seeing my TV, which I'd left on, and so it seemed like I wasn't really coming down per se. It was as if I was finally coming to, only to have the feeling of coming down repeat over and over again. It did stop eventually, which involved me sitting up and throwing up in the wastebasket which I'd prepositioned just for this situation. My heart was pounding like crazy and I gasped for air. It was as if I had died and was reborn. I hadn't even left my bed during the whole time. Whenever I decided to move to another room, my recollections would fade out, and then things would fade in, and I would find myself in the room I wanted to be in. I got up and went to the bathroom, and also took out my contacts at this time. I wanted to go back to bed and just go to sleep because I felt exhausted. I went back to make sure I'd taken out both contacts. My vision was fuzzy, and it looked like I'd only taken out one of my contacts. I looked for the other one on the floor, but I couldn't find it. I repeatedly went back looking for my contact, only to eventually find that I'd actually put both of them in the same side of the case. I went to bed after this, but before I did, I turned off all the lights around the apartment. This was much more difficult than it sounds, as I would turn off one light and forget to turn off another, but I'd realised this when I was already back in my room, as time would jump around on me. The next day, after awakening, I felt a certain calm and connectedness to everything around me. I can still feel it sometimes, if I stop and relax and remember to breathe. He ate crazy mushrooms. An Amanita Muscaria trip report by Dr. D, uploaded to earwid.org on August 3rd, 2005. For the longest time, I had felt drawn to the mystical mushroom Amanita Muscaria, having dreams about them, searching the rugged Rocky Mountains for them growing tucked away in moist pockets of growth near trees. Finally, I obtained the scarlet fungus, and one fateful afternoon, I ate the crazy mushrooms. I decided that the best method of preparation would be a variation on traditional Siberian preparation. I soaked the dry caps in cold water for about 30 minutes, rather than warm water, or boiling due to their strong disagreeable odour. Once rehydrated, I tore the caps into quarter pieces, rolled them into balls, and swallowed all of the wadded up mushroom. Once before I had tried to experience the mysticism of the fly agaric, but I don't think that I dosed it right, so this time I was sceptical about experiencing any effects. In hindsight, I believe that this skepticism set forth a mental state within me which was not appropriate for the awe, humility, and exalted spiritualism which I was about to experience. Knowing from literature that it takes a while for any symptoms of intoxication to appear, I sat down to watch a movie. No attempt of mental preparation was made prior to onset of the effect. When the movie ended, I stood and walked to my bedroom. Immediately I noticed a loss of equilibrium, and a mild numbing sensation in my face and limbs. These effects were identical to the effects of alcohol intoxication. Rapidly though, these effects dissipated and were replaced by nausea and strong sedation. At this time I had retired to my bedroom, where I tried to watch television in an attempt to keep my mind off of the nausea which was bothering me. A haze seemed to roll into my head like a thick fall fog. The images on the television became very blurry, and strong vertigo made me lay still on my cot. At this time I had become a bit anxious due to the strong effects which I had not felt before. Feeling slightly sick, very dizzy and sedated, I lay in silence, and then it hit me. I believe that I may have fallen asleep, although I may have drifted off into a realm of transient thoughts, images and voices. Either way, about an hour after laying down, I was jolted awake by a frightening realization. I was no longer existing in the everyday reality where I go to work, pay bills and drive a car. Frightened, I began to pace agitated, back and forth through my room, ranting about something which I don't quite remember. At this point in time, I could see things in my room, but didn't associate the objects as being mine, or even knowing what they were. My vision was quite blurred and cloudy, like I hadn't slept in several days. This was the last thing I remember seeing before I was whisked away into a dark, quiet place. The mushrooms then suddenly ripped my soul from its physical body, anchoring it to the earth. I was cast into nothingness. I sat in pure darkness, where I didn't have a body. There was nothing around me. No arms, no legs, no body, no head. This state didn't particularly scare me. Somehow I knew that I was placed here in this nothingness for a purpose, so I waited. Soon, I felt a presence. A large, omnipotent being had accompanied me in this void. It was not there to hurt me, yet it was not a benign entity either. I felt safe while in its company, but not comfortable. Then, before I could speak, the entity began to send a barrage of vivid images into my mind, answering questions which had not been asked. Somehow, it had read my whole mind, and suddenly I realised that this entity was the power that be. God, or Allah, Yahweh, or the spirit of the mushrooms, if you will. It was pure power, brute energy, the supreme being. The barrage of images catapulted me through time and space. First I saw the creation of molecules. Atoms becoming molecules, becoming compounds, becoming living things. I watched the entire evolution of the planet Earth, and then the solar system. Each image flashing before my eyes with fierce intensity. A millennium lasted only a second or two, before another millennia unfolded within seconds before my eyes. This continued for roughly 45 minutes, all the while the images flashing faster and faster, flooring me with their intensity. Screaming frantically, I begged for them to stop, and so they did. Pausing only for a brief moment, before they returned to their intense flashing, going this time in reverse. Crashing about my room, I screamed and begged, pleaded for relief from the images, never wanting so badly to return to reality. In an agitated delirium, I thrashed about my room, unable to walk or stand. I crashed into the walls, which I didn't see, and knocked over just about every piece of furniture in my room. Still I was pulled to my knees by the revelations which I was bearing witness to. What happened next, I'm unsure of. I think that I finally fell asleep in a crumpled heap in my dog's large cedar chip-filled beanbag bed. In the morning, I woke with vivid memories of what I had experienced, and felt completely shaken to my roots by the intensity of the experience which I had just endured. The humility was strangely satisfying, having been shown and told through the images, the secrets of the cosmos, and the unveiling of creation. Additionally, I was blessed with a new profound respect for the psychedelic experience, and the intensity of the spiritualism that oftentimes accompanies the experiences. Ingesting the divine mushrooms was, and still is, the most powerful experience of my life. I have since partaken in many psychedelic journeys, but none of them come close to the reverence and fear which I have for the Amanita Muscaria. A year or two ago we decided to try some fly agaric. Unfortunately I can't remember the exact amounts used or the entire experience, but I feel it was life-changing enough to be explained the best I can. If memory serves me right, we had 4 medium caps, may have been more, that were dried in an oven on the lowest setting with the door ajar for an hour or two. This dried material was then ground up in a blender and brewed just below simmer for 30 to 60 minutes. This was achieved by stirring the liquid as soon as it bubbled to cool. A digital thermometer would work great here, and 170 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit is the temperature needed for the ibotenic intermuscimol reaction to happen. No higher, as this will destroy the compounds. The soup already had a magical aura as we made it. Gazing into it, one could see a multitude of colours like a swirling galaxy of stardust. 3 of us drank 1 cup. We waited an hour and with no effects noticeable, 2 of us drank another. The third person was my girlfriend and I didn't want to cause her any danger until I knew firsthand about the effects and dosage. I tried to abstain from other drugs and alcohol the night before, but as was customary at the time, my willpower hadn't lasted. I was feeling a little worse for wear from the night before, shall we say. I will steer well clear of such practices in the future. My girlfriend reported little effects from the 1 cup, other than feeling a little happy, and my other friend had to go home because of his girlfriend having a duck fit about this and that. When I met him again, he said he'd felt very little, other than a few disturbing visions and a long dreamy sleep. He had been heavier on the substances than me the night before, however. So I was sat there at my friend's house thinking, am I feeling anything yet? And looking about the room for any sign. 3D perception picked up a little, whereby the focus of the telly and the wall behind it was noticeable so that it seemed a great distance, or at least I could really tell the distance. And the ceiling and walls seemed to brighten up in colour, with everything a tiny bit hazy. Sort of like your average mild trip. Things did seem a little different to psilocybin mushrooms, however. Then it really kicked in. I was looking up at the furthest corner of the room wondering why it was interesting me so.
I noticed I could really make out everything in that little corner like I was zoomed in on it with a mega telescope or such. I began to notice a sort of predator-like invisible fly or spaceship weaving about in that little corner, and came to realise I could see what was in that little space, but can't usually be seen. Then it spread. Shimmers came down the old woodwork and worked their way across the wooden top of the fireplace and towards me. Sort of like the wood was breathing and still very much alive. This kept happening, sometimes being the focus of the side of the fireplace, top of the telly, etc., but very much of the woodwork. This pulsing, breathing was always in a small area, but travelled in a line around the features of the room and towards me. I noticed throughout though that I seemed to have an aura about me that nothing I saw could enter. This filled me with confidence, whereas such happenings would usually terrify. Afterwards, friends reported that I was sat there looking this way and that way all over the room at things moving, which of course they found strange. There was a crashing and a banging, and all the floorboards and wood, on show, holding the upstairs, started creaking. I looked up and there seemed to be a strong wind of spectre-like clouds passing through the house. This I interpreted as radio or gamma rays and the like that pass through our atmosphere unseen by us or other non-humanoid entities. I very much got the feeling I could see things that are always there but we don't usually detect. The house I was in was poorly maintained. My friend's mother had about a dozen cats, and round the edges of the carpets I could see loads of invisible things jumping in an arc from left to right, etc., just as fleas do. Like the fly, I first saw it as a predator, like in that I couldn't see it or them, but its movement. There seemed to be a lot of little black dots wisping and flying about. Small creatures, entities, spaceships I even thought, or part of a bigger entity that I couldn't fully make out. I got a strange feeling that there was another entity in the room, or looking down on us. Not a ghost or a god like, but like an alien form conducting research on how we live. There seemed to be hundreds of tiny flashes from the curtains and other spots that I thought were miniature reconnaissance teams recording what was going on. This thought of something there watching us without us knowing disturbed me somewhat. I could just make out a hazy, ethereal, roughly humanoid figure in the corner of the room, and got a feeling like it wasn't too happy I could see it. I could feel my aura protecting me, but felt the need to reassure myself in my mind anyway, as I have seen a ghostly entity before that was less than friendly, and such thoughts helped me in that situation. Another story. I thought similar thoughts of, I'm an honest lad who tries to be good to all, so surely good will protect me from any evil, or something along those lines. When all of a sudden, I felt some invisible force throttle me, and throw me back in my chair as if to say, don't take the piss. Sounds scary, but it was not. I got the feeling that this was the wrath of God. I'm not very religious, by the way. Then with a puff of smoke, 2 stone tablets with curved tops, just like in the Bible, then appeared in the air before me with a transcription starting, "The honest man." A booming stereotypical godlike voice then spoke, "He the honest man who shall live," and followed with a short passage, a sentence describing what will come of the honest man. Unfortunately, my short-term memory is terrible. Too many ecstasy tablets over the years, no doubt. And straight away and now, I still can't remember the exact words except for it was very biblical and extremely meaningful. The righteous path of the honest man or such. Eventually I decided to venture to the kitchen. I had been sat in the back in an armchair the whole time, to prepare more fly agaric. On the wall by the door on the way out the room was a picture of my friend's little brother with a cheeky grin dressed in Victorian attire. As I passed it and glanced at it, the face shook its head to the side and gave me a wink. I turned around laughing to explain this to my friends, but in my head I interpreted it as a sign of the third eye. One eye looking into the world around us, the closed eye looking into the soul. I turned back to head through the door, but as I passed into the dining room, a non-threatening, welcoming even, middle-aged man with short brown hair, brown beard and brown clothing was stood in the corner and beckoned me in with his arms. I got the distinct feeling this was a meeting with God, and turned back apprehensive and a little shocked. As I headed back into the dining room, this figure was gone, as if to allay my fears. I headed into the kitchen and began trying to prepare more muscaria. The pulses I was on about at the beginning started coming down the worktop towards me, but stronger and larger. One even threw me off balance. There was a stool in the corner of the room, and I could make out a 13 to 14-year-old lad sat there with his elbow on his knee and supporting his face with his hand. He wore a baseball cap, had a piercing stare and grin. I interpreted this as the devil, as it was not friendly. An entity seemed to loom behind me and was pushing into me, throwing me off balance. This was much bigger than the entity before, but the same white light. I could only make it out quickly in the corner of my eye. Still the boy in the corner stared and grinned. Becoming quite distressed, I turned to go and fetch my girlfriend to be with me, but as I turned, she came up to my face as if to make me jump, boo type of thing, and then disappeared. I interpreted this as the malevolent spirit messing with my mind. I managed to clamber back to the front room and fetch my girlfriend to come be with me, which she couldn't see why it was so absolutely necessary. There was still a presence in the kitchen. The boy in the corner faded in and out of being, but as long as I could see my girlfriend, I wasn't attacked again. I have little memory of what happened after this. Suffice to say, slowly the breathing walls, etc. died down. All this seemed to last an hour or so, but in fact it was several. I felt I had witnessed a world that is always there, but we can usually not see, and my perspective of the world has changed forevermore. For weeks after, I got the little black wisps flying about on rare occasions, like I could just make out something moving which cannot usually be seen. This reminded me of the world opened up by the fly agaric is always there. You just usually cannot make it out. Psilocybe mushrooms are definitely spiritual, but this opened the door to a whole different good and evil, holy or whatever world, and also a world where you sense all that is going on in the space around you. It is said humans can only sense a small percentage of the universe around them. Examples like radio waves, microscopic beings to start with, and of course other dimensions, etc. This mushroom opens the mind up to a lot more. Maybe not all, but a lot more. These mushrooms are not to be messed with. I seriously do not recommend you take them without friends with you, but a lot can be learned about yourself and the world around you if you pay them the respect they deserve. They are not for recreational use. Personally, I don't know if I could manage the whole death and reborn experience. This was intense enough, and there was no vomiting or deep sleep as is reportedly usually the case.